And the remarkable aspect about my story um, is that I was never caught. 30, you know, 37 years of being immersed into that culture, I was never caught, even though my heart was constricted. I could feel every heartbeat of it. So the beauty for me was finally tapping, finally saying, "Okay, how do I get help? How do I get rescued out of this story?"
Yeah.
And God created an intersection that um,
How's it going, family? Thank you so much for joining another episode. You're in the J Cruz podcast where we are sharper together, and I'm excited for my guest today. It's a fellow brother in the fight. If you've been following with the channel, you might have heard of the ministry called Make War. Mostly all my guests so far are brothers that have been a product of that. But we're not here to talk about Make War or even the guy who kind of helped start it all, but about another story, another testimony. And I got my brother here, Jared, and I'm super excited that you guys get to hear his heart that eventually led to Make War, but ultimately it led to his life change, rewriting his family line. But I'm gonna let him explain that. But here's my brother Jared. Hey,
hey,
Jared.
good morning.
Well, how you doing?
Good. Thanks for taking the time to connect.
No, of course. No, thank you for reaching out. Even though we're always in contact, but I
Yeah,
appreciate your desire to be here.
yeah, it's on mission all the time.
Yeah. But let's get to it. Let's get to your testimony. Let us know who you are now, and then I trust that the Spirit will lead.
Yeah, Jared Hinkle, 56, father of three, married to my wife Jennifer for 35 years as of May of this year. So that alone is a testimony of grace right there. Um, I'm currently in printing and packaging, which I started in that industry about 35 years ago, the year that we got married. And God's allowed that industry to provide for our family. I have a little side business around motorcycles that the Lord gave me about 5 years ago, and that helps fund some ministry opportunities. And I've been in motorcycles since I was 11 years old. I got my first one, and 70 some bikes later, I'm still in it. And
How old were you when you got your first one?
yeah, 11 years old, and I crashed on it the first full day that I had it, and I think I still have a scar on my forehead from
What kind of motorcycle
jumping
did
a
you get at 11 years old?
little Kawasaki MC90.
Wow.
So I was Kawasaki branded for a long time, and I'm in the Honda family now.
Okay.
So, but yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
All right. Well, how'd you grow up? I see. Obviously, you got a motorcycle at 11, so it's
Yeah,
interesting.
that was actually a big sacrifice. It was $300, I remember, which was a lot for our family. I grew up actually in a pastor's home. I have two older siblings that are 13 and 9 years older than I am. They grew up much differently than I did, because my father was in the military and then in the NSA when he got called into ministry. So they grew up in a different lifestyle than what I did, because when he went into ministry, it was significant sacrifice. And from the time that I was integrated into it, we grew up in very small towns, small churches, Pennsylvania primarily. In my teenage years, we moved to Michigan, where I ended up meeting my wife, years later. But I was a country boy growing up, and I used to lay in the backyard and look at planes going through the air, and kind of like thinking, I'll never be able to be in a plane or go anywhere. I just, my world was very small. It
Yeah.
was the backyard. It was trees, forests, fishing, hunting, trapping, all that kind of stuff. And then dirt bikes entered into the world. Worked on dairy farms, just weeded gardens, picked strawberries, caught snakes, all that fun stuff. So
Wow.
yeah,
I wouldn't put catching snakes under fun stuff, but I'm obviously not from the country.
we
I'm from the
we
city.
didn't have a lot of poisonous snakes like we're down in this area. I don't catch them anymore. I kill them if I see the copperheads, but black snakes I leave alone.
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned two different worlds. So how old were you when your dad went into ministry then? Was it before you were born or very early?
It was almost the year of. I think I was like 1 or 2 years of age.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was. I was born in Baltimore, Maryland, but we moved to Pennsylvania. I think a year or two afterwards.
Okay. So far, pretty good amount of my guests grew up in the faith. Grew up as Christians in a ministry home, but you grew up in a pastor's home. So how was your upbringing in it?
Um, it's the only life that you know to some degree. Again, it was always very small churches. When I say small, I don't know that. I think probably the largest church we had at one time was maybe 80 to 100 people, but primarily it was in that 40 to 60
Yeah.
category. Setting up chairs, meeting in felt like closets at times when you're in a Sunday school, having like 1 or 2 people in your Sunday school class. It was a very small church environment. Meeting in people's homes for prayer meetings, that kind of thing.
You miss it? That environment?
Do I miss it?
Or you don't remember enough in it to probably miss it?
I don't know that I would say I miss it. I don't. Church was it was just a way of it was just what you did. Now it's a much more mission oriented when I'm in a circle. I wasn't mission oriented of thought back then. It was just that's who my dad was, and that was a lifestyle. Public schools. You said your dad was a pastor. It was kind of maybe a little bit of an oddity when everyone else has a dad that has a career job that 9 to 5, and my dad's job wasn't like that at all. And so we kind of grew up poor. I remember my mom taking care of elderly people. That's what she kind of did. But she got like paid $20 cash in a day. And so yeah, we weren't impoverished, but we didn't have a lot of resources at all. Again, as a child, you don't really process it, but a lot of canning of foods, and I understood why we did a garden now and hunted for, deer meat and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, gardening and canning is making a comeback.
Yeah, I've sworn off gardening. I won't ever pick another weed unless it's right in front of me and it has to move, so yeah. I've been burned out on that.
Okay. All right. Well, then you mentioned that grew up in the faith. It was just what we say more culturally versus a spiritual desire.
Yeah, I mean, I remember sitting on my dad's knee and him telling me about Jesus. And I remember it was just kind of strange. I was like 5 years old, and but it was back in that day. It's like you profess Christ, and like the first Sunday you got baptized. You know what I mean? So there wasn't a transformation evaluation before walking into the waters of baptism. It was just kind of a 1-2 campaign, and so I ended up getting baptized later in life, around 40 years of age, because I felt like it was never really my decision. It was just what you did,
Interesting.
And
so how do you think your family took it that you didn't, being a pastor's kid, you didn't get baptized at a young age, even though being in a church, having a pastor as a dad, being in an environment that you've delayed the process? No,
I didn't. I'm saying I did get baptized when I was young. It was like you say the prayer, and then that next Sunday you're baptized. But I remember being in front of the congregation getting baptized, even at that young of age. But I'm saying that wasn't necessarily I want to follow Jesus the rest of my life. I didn't even know what that meant. You know what I mean? Just recognizing Jesus as Jesus in that small scope of a child's mind. That's all I knew. So.
Okay. So growing up in the faith, pastor's kid, but your genuine baptism, you said, was at 40.
Yeah, that's when I just wanted to and honestly, it was, you'll hear it later in my story here, but it was like I was looking at that moment as being a kind of if I get baptized, will it help everything get in a reset? You know what I'm saying? Because I felt like maybe that's the thing I need to add on to my, spiritual checklist to really walk in a victorious life, because I wasn't walking even a victorious life even back then. So it was kind of a Hail Mary, if you would, to get baptized again in a more of a cognizant state of what that commitment was. And it was a special day. It was at a church that we actually got baptized in the lake during the summertime because they didn't have a baptismal. We were at a school meeting, so we had to wait for the summertime for the waters to be warm, and then it was like everybody that got saved that year or wanted to get baptized. It was like we had two Sundays that we met at the lake, So I chose one of those Sundays, and when I remember coming up out of the water, which just sounds a little bit odd saying it, but to me it was very personal. It was kind of a cloudy day when I literally came out of the waters of baptism with my pastor, which he was very special to me. The cloud moved to the side and the sun came through, and it was almost like a heavenly kiss. Seriously, I mean that's what it felt like to me. That's how it's kind of like a spiritual moment for me to mark on my life, and I could see the Father pursuing me. It's cool.
Okay, so I know my assumption is that majority of the our audience aren't going to catch on to the phrases of intentional and pursue and some of the terminology that we use. But that's not the terminology you use all the time, right? You weren't that guy.
Not to that degree, not in an authentic way, at least. I mean, I might have used some terminology back then, but it didn't have the identity that it has now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how did we get there?
I forgot I'm a crier, and like I need to get Kleenexes. But how did I get there? So, going back to my dad being a pastor, at the age of, I want to say 11 or 12 years of age, it's really hard to mark it, but very early in my adolescence, my dad having small churches, his study was actually set up in our home, and we lived in a split level home, meaning that he kind of had quadrants. He had the upstairs, with living room, kitchen, bedrooms, and then we had downstairs, which was kind of a little living room set up with a TV, laundry room, canning area, bathroom, and then my dad's study. When coming down the stairs, taking a hard right, just going out the back door, you could always, visibly see into my dad's study. And I just saw some awkward movement happening with my dad and putting something away. And in a curiosity of a child, when I went back later to say, what was he so stirred about? That's when I was exposed to pornography for the first time. And so you can imagine the intersection of a child or a young adolescent having a father as a pastor, and then seeing that being exposed to that material. It was a heavy intersection for someone to engage with.
So at that moment, did you comprehend the intensity of that moment of just like, hold on, I'm familiar with this thing. Why is this in my home? My dad's a pastor. No, this is just now looking back, right? So you just
yeah. It. I mean, I knew it was wrong, but to consider the weight of it, no, I wouldn't have said I considered the weight of it. I didn't think of a trajectory of, if I look at this material, if I go back to this material, what's that gonna, do to my life? It's always amazing as a child. I think you don't carry the weight of thought of the future of you. You know what I mean? You just think of the moment in time.
Yeah, I just wondered that just being in a that type of environment that you would have at least maybe it would have been nice if you as a child would have known, oh, this shouldn't even belong in this home, versus just not being even aware of it.
Yeah. And when I say pastor's home, everybody kind of runs to the ideological thought process of a dynamic Christian home. That was not our home. It was actually more of a possibly just of a job of way of a means. It wasn't something that was joy filled, always talking about the Lord, praying, holding hands, having family devotionals, having Christian music playing in the background. It wasn't that type of home dynamic. So I know it's easy for us to hear a story about a pastor's home and kind of put an ideological stamp on that. That wasn't the home.
Yeah, and I know that's hard to be able to say that, because that's your dad, right? And that's a home you would kind of looking in retrospect, like that you would have wanted. But I'm glad you brought that clarity because it is true. Like, and that should be known that not every. It's unfortunate. It shouldn't be this way. But
No, it has to be
it should be
countless
different.
homes that are out there like that. I mean,
Yeah.
because you just know the enemy, the ploy. I mean, there's a reason why it says, "Lord, Lord, I've done all this in your name." It says, "Depart from me, you workers of iniquity."
Yeah.
Those aren't claimed sinners. Those are claimed saints that aren't experiencing the authentic life.
Yeah. So you find the material, you panic. What's next? Maybe not chronologically, but
Yeah,
in your
you,
story.
you get drawn into that. You're seeing something. God designed us in a way as young males that that's stimulating something that's not yet to be stimulated.
Yeah.
But back in that day, you didn't have a website. You didn't have any of those um, frequencies of or opportunities for quick fixes.
Yeah.
Back in that day, honestly, it was not uncommon to find, even though I was in a remote area of Pennsylvania, like 800 people in our township, it was not uncommon to find magazines just thrown out of cars on the side of the road.
Hmm.
And so I would come across those, occasionally. And then there was a junkyard that was literally two houses down in a big barn, and guys would store their cars there. I stored my motorcycle there during the winter time, and guys would actually bring in stacks of magazines. I found that a year or two later. Again, the hiding.
Interesting.
Uh,
Yeah.
so
Wow.
it's amazing how when you hear a lot of guys' testimonies, how young children get exposed to things not when they're pursuing, and it's not like they're out there pursuing it, but the enemy knows how to trace into someone's life the intersects. I mean, he's a prowling lions. He can even make and devour, and we don't think of that in the child landscape. But if you hear a lot of testimonies, young people get exposed to things at a young age. They don't know how to even
Yeah.
process and think of it, but it sets a hook, and then you don't realize how it starts to unfold in someone's life if it's not intersected early.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely, and then especially when it's not being discussed that is what is coming after you. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah,
like
you're
just
even looking for the signs of it. Yeah.
yeah, like after my life change and a life change of many others, being it's difficult to do, but me having little kids and especially having boys, as young as I possibly can sense any sense of like, oh, I think they're now old enough to be hanging around individuals that don't have healthy homes, that I don't want to be the one that initiates that conversation about, hey, you're going to be able to one day find these magazines, or forget magazines. Someone might want to show something to you in your phone, but now we got to have those conversations. It's just like, I understand that your 8-year-old friend has a cell phone, but I don't want you looking at his phone.
Yeah, you almost want to put them through a play acting of like, all right, how would you respond? And like almost have them demonstrate how they're going to respond in that moment. It's
Yeah.
like a training, if you would, because it's so subtle. It's so, and you get captured in that moment and you don't know how to make a move. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So the training up of a child nowadays is going to be, how do I make a move when I see something on a screen,
Yeah, we need to be proactive, not reactive. And it's like, I know I've heard other parents that was like, oh, I just don't want to have that conversation too early, and I'm the one to introduce it. And it's just like, well, if you're the one that, God willing, they haven't even experimented, seen, or heard of it, you want to be the one that gets to set that framework of
Yeah.
just like, this is what's out there, this is how you deal with it, and it worst case scenario, you run the dad.
Yeah.
And we'll take care of it,
Yeah.
But anywho, it's a little commercial on parenting, I guess.
Yeah.
But so did it create this pattern instantly, or was it what? How did it develop?
Yeah, well, you go back to 5 years old, you ask Jesus come into your life. Well, it was my real first interaction with sin and knowing that it was absolutely wrong.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's a lot of things we can say is wrong, like lying to your parents or taking something or that. But this seemed like a big, serious sin to me. Like it was like this, like a whole nother level of just like disobeying your mom and dad, or taking something that you shouldn't have taken, or saying something that you shouldn't have said. This was a sin category for me as a adolescent, that I started feeling the weight of this is really not right. and yet I
Interesting.
couldn't break myself from it. Then I really started falling into saying the sinner's prayer. I mean, if I said it 100 times, I said it 1,000 times, because you feel like, why am I in this conflict? You know what I mean? And you looking at it back now as a mature believer, what you're realizing is that you're in spiritual warfare, and you're thinking that you're going to be able to do it on your own. You know what I mean? You're thinking that there's some point of delivery of of a prayer, a
Yeah.
moment, a time, getting married. Like you're thinking that this, and you don't understand the playbook of how do I get set free? How
Yeah.
do I have help? How
That's so
do I
good.
have, and so you're just trying to hope for a moment that you don't even know what that moment is,
Mm,
but you're clanging for it internally, but yet you couldn't identify it if it showed up because you
yeah.
don't know what it is. You know what I mean? Because as much as we talk about salvation, you go to any church that's gospel oriented, um, you just hear about recognize Jesus, that He's your Savior, and that you need Him as your sin. Well, I was doing that daily, and yet I couldn't find the crossover of living in that freedom, and
Yeah.
I didn't even know the word freedom. At that point, I just didn't want to. I knew it was wrong. I knew it was beating me down, but I didn't know how to intersect it. But unfortunately, when you're in that clinging moment and you don't feel safe to maybe say something to somebody or whatever, you do start becoming desensitized to it to some degree,
Yeah.
because you're looking into that prayer moment of forgiveness, um, as being okay. Well, at least if I confess my sins, He's faithful and just to forgive us my sins, and that's what you're kind of clinging on to, as your hope.
Yeah. Yeah. You said a lot there. Very, very great loaded things. Like, and as you're saying all the everything you just said, what comes to mind is like we do a very good job displaying God's salvation, very poor job importance in discipleship. And
Hmm.
I would agree that I was very, when I was stuck in my ways, I always went to salvation. Lord, free me from this, free me from this. You've paid for this. You said those, are
Hmm.
free indeed. But I wasn't freed from it. And it wasn't until, understanding the weight of discipleship and how pregnant that word really is. And pregnant's the only word I can really use to describe it because it's multifaceted, so many different circumstances, environments, individuals, studies, denies, and whatever it may be that we, I guess, have not put too much value into it and just, hey, just get saved, get baptized, and then,
Yeah.
good luck. No one's really saying that, but that's honestly kind of what it feels like.
Yeah. Yeah. It
But
used to be called membership. Just become a member. You know what I mean? And you'd walk into a church, and up on the front of it, it would say, "Hey, we had this many in church," and we would count the wins by membership, not by
yeah,
any other, or by attendance, and not by any other means, which is just crazy.
yeah,
But
this is in the school.
yeah, so that was a scoreboard for a win.
Yeah.
Um, so anyhow,
So you mentioned so at some point in time you just got. I guess would you say you gave up that you would ever be freed from it because you mentioned that you were desensitized to it. Was it a man, I surrender? This is just like I
yeah, I
don't
want
think
to
I
be
can
careful
fight
with
this
the
off.
word desensitized, because I always knew it was wrong.
Yeah.
But I think I learned to manage it in a way
Okay.
of a, hey, if I'm gonna feel horrible, I know, but then a couple of days go by, and it's like, okay, and I'm gonna ask for forgiveness, and I'm gonna go serve. I'm gonna give my resources. So it's like we're band-aiding it constantly with our works, if you
Yeah.
would, and then hoping that you're, speaking of a scoreboard, you're more heavily in that category than you are in the category of a downfall. So I did manage it, because I managed it in secrecy,
Mm-hmm.
and creating times. That's why I always tell a guy when he's choosing sin, when someone says, "Well, I messed up this week," or "I tripped up," or I'm like, no, I know it very well. You're very methodical when you're planning on sinning.
Yes.
There's it's you're thinking of that moment, and you realize the moment that you're in, and you're creating a pathway to get to that moment. And so it's a very intentional act. Now, I'm not saying that the surges don't come, in a moment's time,
Yeah,
an
yeah, yeah.
instant, but in that instant that it comes, that's when you have to understand, how am I going to fight through this in an effective way, not in a planned way.
No, I agree, and I also need to be careful on how I explain this. But it's like there's categories to sin, and sin is sin, but there's natures to it, and there's the methodical ones, like no pornography, alcohol. You throw it in there; those you're gonna methodically go get those fixes.
Mm-hmm.
You're distracted, you're working on your car, or you're doing things, something startles you, and you lash out. Like, yeah, you didn't methodically plan to
Yeah,
yell at
yeah.
someone or possibly respond with anger. Like, you didn't methodically, but
Other sins.
usually those sins, those situations don't lead you down this path of like, oh, dang it, I messed up again.
Yeah,
It's the ones you methodically went through.
yeah, yeah,
If that makes sense,
yeah. That totally. So yeah, got married at a very young age, 21. Went to school. I actually went to school to be a youth pastor. Just because growing up in a home, you're kind of like, oh, you get good personality, people like you, you know. Uh, so I actually went to Bob Jones University,
Okay.
and I visited like three different schools. One of the schools I went to was Tennessee Temple, and I remember going into that room with that guy, and he had rock music playing, and I was like, in my head, I'm like, you're at a Christian school, and I'm listening to rock music, which I started to get freed from rock music because I just, for me, I kind of had an encounter with the Lord that, um, rock music wasn't doing me any favors. And I was in the early, in about 85, contemporary Christian music started to become more popular. And God really used that to help me kind of connect more with Him, more so that school got knocked off the list. I went to another school that I wasn't really drawn to, but the whole reason I went to Bob Jones, and I mean this, was it was such a rigid school that I thought it could form me into who I wanted to be, with discipline and with having your hair cut, and you had to be at Vespers, or you had to
Structure.
be at the chapel at a certain time, and you had Devo every night with your small group. So I was immersing myself in a culture and in a format that I thought was going to form me. It was forming the outside of Jared, but it was doing nothing with my heart.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't realize that at the time. But I was a horrible student. I took English 101 three times before I finally passed. And I got
Didn't
into
you
one of
speak English?
yeah, this is the very beginning. I grew up in so got to 102, failed that. So the first 2 years of Bob Jones, I was barely hanging on, like a C minus, 2.7, whatever the numbers are, 2.5, and having to take classes over. And there was harder classes to come that I'm like, this just isn't going to happen. But after the 2 years, I got asked to go into a ministry team called The War, which is kind of funny,
I don't know this. Okay.
this many years later. And it was an evangelistic team, and we traveled the East Coast, from Chicago all the way down to the tip of Florida, Fort Myers, I believe. And every week we went into a church and did evangelistic outreaches. I was the Army captain, Green, and the captain was Navy. We would have these big war games to entice kids to come out from the community. Then they hear evangelistic message, and then hopefully get plugged into that church, to help grow the youth group. So um, that really kind of ignited me. But even on that season of my life, I was still finding ways to
Yeah.
pleasure, and the remarkable aspect about my story um, is that I was never caught. 30, 37 years of being immersed into that culture, I was never caught, even though my heart was constricted. Like I could feel every heartbeat of it. So the beauty for me was finally tapping, finally saying, okay, how do I get help? How do I get rescued out of this story?
Yeah.
And God created an intersection that um, He allowed that to happen. So
And I just want to highlight something that just I know is going to be continued to highlight it as many episodes come out is you were in the right environments. You were doing the right things. You were serving even above and beyond. You're going to
yeah,
go be a youth pastor. You're in putting yourself, immersing yourself in situations that should develop
yeah,
biblical character.
yeah.
How many more brothers do we walk with today,
That's
right
right.
now, who are in that exact same situation that from the outward you're like, man, that's a man of God? Because I'm pretty sure
Oh yeah.
non-discerning believers
Oh, we get
are
the Hinkle.
walking and saying, man, Jared's the man. Jared's the man.
Yeah, yeah. That's why I say the mission field is to your left and to your right on a Sunday morning. You know, um, it's real, and you're seeing that played out, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah,
So
yeah. And that's definitely the heart behind this channel is you and I have talked about this off camera, but I want to keep bringing it up as much as I can. Is like this channel is for bringing that to the forefront. Like you listener, you viewer, me on the chair, you in the chair. The battle is not so much the person you don't know, but it's the person you actually do know. It's the person you sit
oh
with in
yeah,
the next at church because you tend to sit in the same place in the same area. It's that brother, it's that sister, it's that young man, it's that little kid. Like everyone's in a serious fight, and unfortunately, our flesh is really good on showing that we're not.
yeah. Your proximity is your mission field. I
Yeah.
mean, that's where the Lord has put you, right?
Yes.
So yeah, you can, spend $1,500 to put yourself on a mission trip somewhere in the world and have an amazing week
Which
and
is
come
needed.
back. What's that?
I'm on which is still needed. We're not
Oh
knocking.
yeah,
We're not knocking missions.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm saying, you can have that just an impactful mission field with
Yeah.
the person across the table from you, and sometimes even be more meaningful because then you get to see it progress, and change, and you're seeing that life, grow in that. So yeah.
Yeah.
So going back to,
Yeah. You
I was
mentioned the
glad I
tap
did.
out. You're ready to tap out.
Yeah, so I was so glad that the Lord took me to that point of a breaking point, because what I always try to encourage men is when you get caught in a sin versus you confess to a sin, um, there's a different weight in that, just in the natural
Yeah.
state. Because if you get caught and you say, "Oh, I'm so sorry," well, I would expect you to say that,
Yeah.
But if you confess to a point where no one would know, there's beauty in that,
Yes.
because that man is carrying a burden from not only a mind but from his heart, and that's where it means to humble yourself in the sight of the Lord,
Mm-hmm.
that He may lift you up.
No, I would
And
agree
so,
with that. Yeah.
anyhow,
Yeah. Because usually the individuals that get caught are gonna get caught again and get caught again, and hopefully stop. But the individuals that do cry out and expose themselves, yeah, that's a man leading to a life change.
yeah, and
Hopefully.
that's why we give that guys the opportunity to tell their story, because that allows for that opening to take place. If they can yield to the Spirit in that moment, that's when things can happen.
So tell me what was going on that led to you exposing yourself. Like, what was that environment, situation, hard time in life, time in your marriage? Like, what was it?
Yeah. So, moved to Chicago, Jen and I. We made $15 between the two of us. I made 8, she made 7, and just God's incredible grace to allow that to take place. When you don't have a college degree, it's hard to ask for money. You just ask for a job. So started in that entry point. Went to a Bob Jones church up there, and got involved with the youth ministry. So we actually helped with the bus kids, and so it was a very affluent area we went to. But our mission was to go into the apartment complexes and pull these kids out, and they literally kept the bus kids segregated from the rest of the church. It was kind of the oddity of it. Now looking back, was crazy, but you felt like we were this is our mission. We were doing
Yeah.
something important. So teaching kids, loving on kids, having big, impact environments for kids. But in the entirety of the time, I was still in my struggle, and I really did think getting married would satisfy everything. Again, you're just hoping for that next
Yeah.
moment to be the freedom moment. Um, well, that didn't happen, and ended up we got out of that church because we went to a Moody Bible Friday night sing with Steve Green, and the church at that time, in those early era of 1990s, wasn't embracing of any type of contemporary Christian music. And if you think Steve Green is contemporary, but so we got asked. We were told we couldn't serve if we wouldn't stop listening to contemporary Christian
Wow.
music. And I was like, well, God's used contemporary Christian music in my life big time. I'm like, I'm not going to be in a church I can't serve. So we ended up leaving, and God put us in a church where, for the first time, I started understanding grace. Because at that point, being out of a Bob Jones environment, I was very driven to how was your haircut? What kind of clothes are you wearing? Do you have your Bible in hand? Why aren't you wearing a suit to church? I was just all
Very
these
legalistic.
outside appearances
Yeah.
that were, I was,
You
I
have to
would
fit the
never
bill.
even consider the heart. You know what I mean? And
Hmm.
if you started talking spiritually to me, it was like, oh, you must be a fake. You know what I mean? So my mind's been so flipped
Wow.
from where I was to where I am.
I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
It's definitely God takes you to another extreme.
So got into we moved, went to a different church, super dynamic church, expository preaching church, and was just awesome. And then the pastor retired, and another assistant pastor, came in. I was Wana Cubby leader during that
Oh,
time.
what?
Awanas,
Oh, okay, okay, okay.
yeah. So I was the Cubby leader, and it was pretty intense for 5 year olds, but I had a lot of fun doing game time and all that kind of thing. So, giving, serving, all of this, and that pastor that came up almost had an intersection with an affair with someone in the congregation that got revealed. So we pulled out of that church, went to a different church. So this whole time, intersecting heavily in churches and congregations and being, I mean, I love the word. I love listening to Moody Bible. I love listening to Focus on the Family. I mean, all of it. But this gnawing of this addiction was just always in front of me. So then when the web got introduced, and, cable TV got introduced, that platform just became so much easier. And working shift work at times, you had access to go to the video store, while your wife was at work, and
Hmm.
so again, everything was a play, and I just couldn't get beyond it. So I always was trying to look at life scenes. What could I change? What could I change at work? I was always trying to find some type of scene change to happen, and I got a call. I got exposed to Dave Ramsey, and it's part of my story. But Dave Ramsey, I never knew anything about finances,
Yeah.
and um, I listened
Better
to
than
him.
I deserve.
Got introduced to him listening to Oprah. My wife said, "You got to hear this guy from the South. He's pretty funny the way that he talks." But God used Dave in a way of I was in sales at that time, traveling all across the country on airplanes, and listened to him. And for the first time, I started understanding what money was, and I was heavily in debt on multiple fronts. And if I could afford the monthly payment, that's what I thought I could
Yeah.
afford. And so ended up really getting in trouble, refinanced a house on an interest only loan, and it scared me to death when I realized what I did because my payment kept going up instead of down. And anyhow, got introduced to Dave Ramsey, got a bonus that year, and I was able to pay off all of our debt except our house. And just a few months later, or no, 2 months later, I get a call for an opportunity to take on a corporate role in Spartanburg, South Carolina. And in that moment, still heavily in my
Here we go.
sin, um, I was like, if I move to the South and I'm around the Bible Belt and I'm in around Christians and the music, instead of this Chicago barren wasteland, it's kind of, I thought about it. It was so crazy expensive to live there. The ideology was so different than mine. I'm like, maybe that's where I'll find freedom. So I remember, flying down here, and for a corporate role with a guy that doesn't even have a degree, I was like, this probably ain't gonna happen. But God goes before those, and you have a verse up here, which was the one I clung to: "Be still and know that I am God."
Yeah.
Psalms 48:10, 46:10, and I'm just like, okay, I'm just gonna trust you. So he put me in this corporate role with everybody that had at least a master's degree, and I was the corporate ink guy because that was my background, and so still on the road, still in a struggle. But at least God got me to a location where I had the best opportunity to potentially get exposed to a different lifestyle. So fast forward, I got, it was really hard to find a church. We went to like 17 churches before we found church, and we actually ended up going to New Spring.
Okay.
And the
Yeah.
thing that drew me to New Spring and the oddity of it
What
was,
year is this?
oh, wow.
Roughly.
It'd be 10, 15 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah. I was there for quite a while. So at least 15 years ago. And maybe 12 years ago. But the thing that drew me to that was the pastor, as he met with us, talked about his pornography addiction. And I was like,
hold on.
why would a pastor be talking about a pornography addiction? But he's just like, hey, here's where I was. And, and God set me free through it. And so I was just drawn to that. I was drawn to the honesty aspect of it because I knew of my own father's story and the deceit. And I knew in a world, in a church environment, for you to talk about a struggle, the way I grew up, was not something because you saw people get, taken out of churches for anything. Like, you can't serve.
Yeah.
I got told I can't serve because I listen to contemporary music. So can you
Wait till they
imagine
find
saying,
out, yeah.
can you imagine saying,
Yeah,
oh yeah,
excommunicado.
I struggle with pornography. You know what I mean? So that's what I'm saying is like that intersection of openness and candidness done in love was a drawing card for me. So strangely enough, I went on to the care team there where I would, be praying for people that would respond, whether in salvation or just needs. And the Lord really started cultivating that in me of caring for people and kind of carrying a burden for somebody. And I hadn't really, been in that circle. And that particular church, people were very responsive. And I think they were very responsive because it was a very open church that it wasn't critical in spirit over how you were dressed, how you came, what your family story was. It was all just about how can we help you, or what music you listen to. So, the Lord started cultivating that. But even in that, I was in a struggle. So I left that job to go work for the ink company that I'd left up there. And I thought, maybe that would help. And I knew it was a mistake right away. So I ended up going back. They hired me back in that corporate role. And again, still in the struggle. I was even praying with guys that were struggling with pornography, and I'm like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." Well, my wife would always ask me in the times the churches would bring up pornography or talk about it.
Yeah.
We come home, and in the kitchen, she'd say, "Like, man, there's so many people that struggle with this. Like, you don't struggle with this at all? You've been exposed?" And I'm like, "Man, I don't." I said, I feel so bad for those that do. I mean, I literally would, say that just to cover it, and so. Going forward, I got to an intersection where I went and quit my job. Our corporate offices were being told we were going to go back to Chicago, and ended up that I didn't want to go back to Chicago, and I had an opportunity to work for a family friend, and it was in a totally different industry, and when I told you I got debt free and I moved to Chicago, moved away from Chicago, I took like a $50,000 pay cut at that time. But I was like, I don't really have to get a house, check and stay home. And, I thought it was, a good reset. Well, here I was again with a career built back up again. And I was just so miserable that I was just trying to find somewhere else to connect with. So I went to work with a Christian friend, taking another $50,000 pay cut because I thought, well, if I get in proximity with really good Christian people and I'm just working with them,
It finally might work.
Yeah. And I got into that. The first day I walked into that job, I knew it was wrong. It was the wrong move because what I was told and what I saw were two different
Mm-hmm.
things. Um, and I even moved out to Colorado prior to that. I forgot to add that into my story, but again, I always wanted to go out to Colorado because it was where focus on the family was, and I could have a restart, and the nature out there, and there's got to be people that love God there. So I did a job move out there for 8 months. I was constantly trying to reset my life stage to get freedom, and even to the extremity of taking
Yeah.
$50,000 twice in pay
Consistently
cuts,
moving, changing
just because
jobs.
your mind tries to frame it out in a way that you think you can do it,
Yeah.
and it's just the natural propensity of it. And
It's the flesh.
and I uh I made, so now I'm not even in my industry. I'm selling catalytic converters, and it was something I was totally unfamiliar with, but it was in the auto industry. I like engines, I like speed, I like all that kind of stuff. Um so I'm like, all right, I can do this. So I started, bringing in work and business and that, but the stronghold didn't change at all. And in my despair of knowing I made a big financial loss, I don't have the benefits that I had. My wife doesn't know what's going on. I mean, I was just heavy, heavy, heavy. And I'm driving home from work one day, and I get an email that comes across from the church, and it's an invitation for a program called Radical Mentoring. And they say, hey, we prayed about this. You're one of the names that came up. We'd like for you to consider it. And when I saw that word radical, the Lord used that to call me back,
Yeah.
Um, so I'm like, okay, I would need something radical to happen. So it
You've
was
been doing radical things on your own, taking radical pay cuts,
yeah, yeah,
or radical debt.
yeah. It was for real. Um, so it was a 10-month commitment. We only met once a month. It was a hard commitment. Like, this is all in, no deviation unless God takes you off planet Earth. You're
Yeah.
committed to this program. And so I kind of needed that. Remember, I went to Bob Jones kind of thinking, hey, I need some structure. And then I'm like, okay, I need something that's going to make this happen. And so the very first book we read, it was part of the program, was called Bo's Cafe. And it was all about the guy that had it look like he had it all together, but inside he was in turmoil. And immediately I knew what this program was going to do. And I was
Hmm.
fearful of it because it was going to expose me. And but he already made the commitment, so
Yeah.
you're in on it at this point. And so it was with six other guys, and it was all
Well,
from our
hold on.
church.
I understand that you made the commitment, but still, why not quit? Because I know there's many who make the commitment and then they know what's coming and they're like, "No, I'm billing out." So why do you think you
I
actually?
was so weary that I couldn't. It felt like it was for a time. I mean, God took me in that moment. It was like, all right, are you weary enough now? I mean, I was 47 years of age, and I was weary. I mean, I was really weary. Um, no matter what amount of success you have in this world, or places that you've traveled, or anything, I mean, it all diminishes if your spirit isn't in its
Yeah.
right text. And so I traveled internationally. I ate great food. I had luxuries, and it just didn't mean anything. It just didn't. Um, so I had learned that. Remember, I was a kid in the backyard looking at planes, going,
Yeah.
"I'm not going to go
You ain't gonna go
anywhere."
nowhere.
And he took me everywhere.
Yeah.
Europe, India twice, Thailand. I mean,
So you were
Canada.
weary and broken enough.
Yeah, it was this. It
Yeah,
was an
that's good.
easy. It was an easy tap moment,
Yeah.
and at that point, it wasn't even a tap moment. I just knew that it felt like a safe place, because you had to sign a letter of confidentiality, and
Yeah.
it was kind of the extreme that I felt safe in it. You know
Okay.
what I mean? So so only once a month we met. So read this book, and then the next month you get another book to read. You got to do a net out, and then you're connecting with the guys, and then the leader ended up telling his story, and it was a pretty impactful story. Broken family. Dad was very successful. got exposed to drugs. Every life story seems dramatic, in a way, but God uses dramatic to pursue His own.
Mm-hmm.
And so this guy was telling a story. But then they set up a retreat that we were going to go away, and everyone was going to get a chance to tell their story. And he encouraged us to break it down into 5-year increments so that you could frame it out in a way that
Okay.
it made sense. And so in the early framing out of my story was 5 years old, you get saved. And in that next 5 years, you get exposed to pornography, and then for the next, how many years, 30 years, you're in this cycle that you can't get out of, that no
Mm-hmm.
one knows about. And a lot of my dad being in the ministry was a way of guarding my story, because exposing your father in a ministry, which he was still active in, um, was a big exposure. I
Yeah.
mean, not only to others, but in my family.
Had a lot of ramifications. Yeah.
Yeah, to a grandfather and to my father-in-law. The guy married us, so. Um, but anyhow, we went into that weekend, and for the first time, I need to do a quick. Can I do a quick pause here? 'Cause
Yeah.
there's an element of my story that 5 years prior to that, I heard a guy in church talk about his struggle with pornography, and it was in a youth group setting. His
Mm-hmm.
name was Steve, and we're in this parent youth group setting, and he talks out loud about having a pornography addiction. Honestly, it was the first time I had ever heard a guy ever say that in a
Yeah.
church setting, and I'm like, Steve, do you realize what you just said out loud? And for me, he yelled it, and for everybody else, they dismissed it. But when I heard him say it, I was like, why did you say that out
Yeah.
loud?
Yeah.
But that was a captivating moment for me, because all of a sudden I felt I had something in common
Yeah.
with someone that was really in a struggle, that confessed it as a struggle. And I'm like, I need to talk to Steve. So I called up Steve to meet. It was downtown, Dunkin' Donuts, Spartanburg. And that Saturday morning, for the first time, I confessed to another man
Okay.
about my struggle. When I say I confessed, there's like 30 napkins with tears and snot all over the top of
Yeah.
that table. Those guys were walking in, picking up donuts on that Saturday morning. And then everybody had to be like, what's wrong? But I couldn't help it.
Yeah.
I had carried it for so long with no one knowing. I just broke. And so I said to him, hey, Steve, would you help me with this? Can I call you? And I'm like, he goes, yeah, absolutely. I said, when I say call you, I said, I mean like every day, call you. And he's like, yeah, that's fine. So that Monday morning, I called Steve, and I worked like 10 minutes from my house. And I said, hey, I made it 24 hours. And I called him the next morning,
Yeah.
and I said, hey, Steve, I made it 24 hours, and we'd close out with a prayer. And that full week, I called Steve. And it was kind of like, all right, I got this momentum, and it feels good.
Okay.
And so the following week, see Steve in church, give him a hug, thanks for being with me. That Monday, I call Steve on the way to work, and Steve doesn't answer. I'm like, oh, okay, no big deal. Now, you can always be available at 7:50 in the morning. And next morning, drive to work, call Steve. Steve doesn't answer. And at that moment, I was like, why am I a grown man calling another grown man, telling him I made it 24
Yeah.
hours? It feels like, it sounds really stupid, awkward at this point. Well, I never bring it up to Steve again, and Steve never comes back and asks me again, how you doing?
But you still saw him at church and everything. Still cordial.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And it was oddity. I was disappointed in spirit, but I didn't know anything. So it didn't take but weeks before I was back into my cycle all
Yeah.
over again. So going into this radical mentoring, I kind of had that as my background. I'm like, okay, here again, I'm going to go. I'm going to
And
tell my
commit myself to
story.
these guys,
I'm
they're
going to
gonna
expose
fail.
myself once again. What's going to happen? So we get into that weekend, and started hearing life stories that are, or really heavy life stories. And I get to my life story, and I break just as I broke with Steve at that Dunkin' Donuts. And it was crazy hard. But the thing that marked that moment differently was the enemy whispering into me, like, enjoy this moment. It feels good. Enjoy the weekend, but life isn't going to be different.
Mm,
You're going to go back
it won't last.
because that's what I had experienced. But to his glory, it has been different. And so for the next 7, 8 months, I was in this. I had to be in the Word every day. That was probably the biggest discipline that got interjected into my life that wasn't there before.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the responsibility, the accountability of being in the Word every day. When I first heard that, I was like, every day. When you say every day, you really mean every day? And it's like, yeah, you're going to be in it every day. And so God used that personal time with Him to start forming the man that I would become. And He could speak to me in those moments of, I didn't have to call Steve that day.
Yeah.
I could be with the Lord that day, you know.
It's
And
it's sad how many of us, including myself, that when they hear you got to be in your word every day, that they go, "What do you mean every day?" But yet, I don't have to convince anyone to eat every day.
yeah, yeah,
And yet, he says that his word is what?
yeah,
Right?
yeah.
And that okay.
So God started forming that discipline in me that became a desire that I'm not going to give myself too much credit here, but I would say if everything was stripped away from me, I can't imagine still not being in the Word every day. Like if I didn't have a
Yeah.
accountability group, I mean, okay, I'm not gonna give myself too much credit, but that discipline became a desire, and that's where it's at today. And I so look forward to seeing what that next verse is going to be. That He gets to sit with me and reveal to me and pen into me in my heart, my mind, and then share to others. So that was probably the biggest catalyst. Even though I was now in a community of being known, so in that community of being known, the next month that we met, my leader said to me, "Well, hey, I'm glad you're walking in freedom and that."
Yeah.
And I still had the desires. I was still in the
Of
struggle
course.
with that. But he says, "What are you going to tell your wife?" And it was such a shock and awe statement to me at that moment because I'm like, tell my wife.
Why? I'm free.
I'm talking to you guys. You guys
Yeah.
are my accountability group. And he goes, well, I really think you need to tell your wife. And I'm like, well, I appreciate that sentiment, but that's not going to happen. My wife's like a spiritual rock star, and I'm not gonna clash her world for this. So the next month we met, going around the table, guys getting an opportunity to share. It comes up again, and I'm like, dude, I said, I promise you, I am not going to have this conversation with my wife. Well, one of the older gentlemen in the group that was in the same stronghold that I was, he had gotten caught by his wife, a number of times, and he said, Jerry, it really would be the best thing. I said, dude, I said, you got caught by your wife. I said, I haven't been caught, and I said,
Yeah. I'm not
I'm
gonna put
not gonna
myself in
I'm
that
not gonna
situation.
mar her, for that. It wasn't a kind thing to
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
but in the flesh is always here to
Yeah.
respond when the spirit,
You were protecting her.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so third month came, and my leader pressed in again, and at this point, the kind Jared wasn't available that day, and the flesh Jared was, and I'm like, I started getting pissed that he was like pressing me in this category because I'm like, I'm not, you got to remember, I'm 37 years into protecting this secret, this
Mm-hmm.
identity, and you're asking me to rip that identity off in someone that I care for deeply, and I could risk greatly transforming that relationship, and becoming known. I wasn't willing to risk that identity, you know.
Yeah. And I want to pause on that moment to bring up two things. Like that is what sin does. Like you don't really think about that when you enter a stronghold like that. That this is gonna hold on to you for 37 years, and you could be married, and you can have a whole family, you can have a career, And when you get that freedom, it could very well destroy all of that.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
number
your
one,
landscape could be totally different than
and
what
then
it.
number two is the second point of it is, well, now when you are on the other end of it, yes, it is scary and it is completely understandable why you wouldn't want to do that. But you got to realize that 37 years, 20 years, whatever years it was a facade. And you need to break that down so God can create a different relationship. And it's scary to not know what it might look like.
Oh yeah.
Because for some guys, they might be like, that wife is gone.
Oh yeah. No,
Those kids never might want to speak with you again.
it's a risk assessment that you don't know what it's going to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Other than obedience.
Yeah.
And that's when you're fully trusting him. So after that interaction, I knew it was the right thing to do because I was in the Word every day.
Mm.
I was feeling much more authentic in my relationship with him. My care conversations were much more genuine. Like transformation was starting to take place, but I knew it would be something that would be incredibly difficult because I was a con artist for so long that no one knew. And so to flip my identity in that, I just didn't know, like you said, you didn't know what that landscape was going to change like. So with much fear and trembling, we were going to bed one evening, and I put out to our group to the guys, I'm like, okay, guys, please say a prayer for me because I'm going in tonight. This is the night that's going to be revealed. Of course, the guys are rallying.
Yeah.
And so we both climb into bed. And again, she's been watching for months now. First of all, we're interacting like crazy. We're all kind of walking in some level of freedom. She's seeing me in the Word every day. She's never seen that before. So all this identity is changing and everything is confidential. So I'm not coming home and saying, oh, you can't believe about Alan. You can't believe about Forrest. You can't believe about Greg, Tim.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm not able to tell anything. And she was supportive of all that, but it's not like she was understanding it all. It was kind of like this hidden society kind of campaign. So
she knew something was up, but they didn't understand the details.
Yeah, she's just seeing a husband that's changing and that's more affirming and that's loving and that's in the Word, and I'm starting to cry a lot more than I ever used to. So I get in that moment where we're both laying in bed, and the big part of sin too for me was I was never at rest. What I mean that is like I would wake up in the middle of the night. I could feel the burdens of the world, the burdens of the job, the burdens of everything, and that's one thing that I never had a real genuine peace within Jared. It just was never there. I mean, I had moments of it, but it was never a dwelling of. And so when I got to the intersection of communicating to Jen, I had to start from the beginning. I was going to reveal who my father was, who her father-in-law was, who the grandfather was. And so as I walked through it, I just told the whole story. I didn't leave anything out. And started when I was 12 until present day. And in my mind, I was thinking of all the ways that she was going to respond, like yell, scream, cry, leave, ask me to leave. I didn't know what the outcome was going to be. But what I claimed on that night of saying, you don't know who my wife is, how spiritual she is, when I was defending her to telling her my leader, that was about to be revealed. And the guy's praying with the Spirit. She responded in this way. She said two things. She said, I'm so angry at the enemy that he's taken 27 years of our marriage and has taken that away from us. And she goes, it makes me really, really, really angry. She goes, but I'm also really sad that you couldn't have trusted me as a sister in Christ to walk through this with you. So,
wow,
her spiritual identity got totally revealed in that moment.
Understatement.
Yeah. And then she said, what about your dad? And I'm like, what about my dad? And she's like, well, how do you know if he's still in it or not, or if he's still struggling? Or you need to find out. And I'm like, find out? I said, my dad's going to have a conversation with Jesus. He ain't going to have a conversation with me. And she goes, no, I'm serious. And, but I could, I'm
Yeah.
47 years of age, and I couldn't imagine having a genuine conversation with my dad about who I was and who I knew he was. And I followed my dad for like 10 years, past that moment of the initial reveal that I knew he was still in it, and just knowing myself, I couldn't imagine him not being in it,
Yeah.
because, unless you get help, you're not going to be set free readily.
Yeah.
So that night we cried, we hugged, and I asked for forgiveness and everything. And I literally slept like when I say I slept like a baby, I mean, I was carrying that weight for so long that I literally the spirit said, okay, rest. And I slept through the whole night. And I was so overwhelmed by it that when I woke up the next morning, I just couldn't believe it. Like
That really just happened.
that rest was gifted to me
Yeah.
in something that I hadn't felt in a very, very long time. So I noticed that the bathroom light was on, the door was cracked, and Jennifer wasn't laying next to me. And I walked in, and I revealed my my I don't even know what the word would be, but my naivety of saying to her as I came in, I says, "Man, I slept like a baby last night." I said, "How'd you sleep?" Kind of the dumb thing you would say after the big reveal of 27 years. And she looked at me. She goes, "Yeah, I didn't sleep last night." And she was processing her identity with me for 27 years of
Yeah.
like, who is this guy that I'm sleeping
Yeah.
next to?
Exactly. You can't even imagine the fiery darts that the enemy was putting at her.
Yeah, the flipping her life script.
Yeah.
Because when we got married, she thought we were going into ministry, and biggest thing that one of the biggest things that kept me from ministry outside of struggling in the educational standpoint, and God probably allowed me to struggle so that I wouldn't become my father in a ministry and be someone else different,
Yeah.
But her heart was always to be in ministry. And so I didn't want to go into a ministry scene being a fake, being a falsehood. And so, going into the printing and packaging industry was something, it was just a job at that moment that became a career about 5 years after I got into it. But her whole identity, was she was trying to process it. So, of course, questions were starting to be asked and that. And we never went for counseling. We never went to marriage, possibly we should have. But there was nothing extreme that happened between us. But I allowed her to say, hey, you can ask me any question anytime. You have access to the accountabilities with the group. And she really wanted to make sure that that was in place. But then, it came the time to like, all right, when are you going to tell your children? And when are you going to tell your church? And I think the thing that Jennifer gifted me in that moment, that I didn't realize till later, she gifted me the idea of pursuit about others. Because sometimes when you're so broken in that, you're not thinking of anybody else.
Yeah.
You're thinking about, how am I going to be restored? How am I going to, change? But her initial thought was for someone else. Like if they're still in that, captured. And so God embedded he planted the seed for pursuit in that moment that I wouldn't have had and I thought of.
Yeah, and that wouldn't make sense that would be the next step, because I would assume, naturally speaking in my own life too, is the first instinct would be like, okay, it didn't blow up in my face. I'm going to walk on eggshells, preserve this situation, this marriage as best as possible. The last thing I'm going to think about is telling more people, bringing more people into the life.
You want me to do what?
Yeah, in which, like, especially family members that will end up questioning her, like, you knew this, you forgave him, like all these scenarios that I'm like thinking about.
Yeah,
that would prevent something unnatural, like, okay, when are you going to tell your kids? When are you going to
Yeah.
tell your church? When are you
Yeah.
going to tell your neighbor?
So my oldest was already married, and so he was outside the home. The other two were within the home, and I remember sitting down with them. And again, they're seeing this life change. They're seeing me talk about the Lord all the time. They're like, "Who is this dad?" I mean, I knew you were a Christian, you were this and that, but you seem to be way different. And so when the scripture says the truth will set you free,
Mm-hmm.
I started to experience that freedom in a way that felt genuine. That's the only way I can say it. And so, exposed to my kids. And the reason I really kind of exposed to my kids, because I was starting to be so open about it with other men and being in groups
Yeah,
and being on mission for them and praying for them. And Jen's like, you don't want your kids to find out
there's someone else.
through someone else. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. So
There's wisdom in there.
my daughter Emily and Austin, my youngest boy, they sat there in the kitchen, and I was going to reveal their grandfather, which was probably the harder part of the identity,
Yeah,
because they had a natural affection towards their grandfather, who was always praising them and giving them accolades and
yeah,
telling them how awesome they were, how cool they were, how pretty they were, all that stuff. So I was going to expose him, and then I was going to expose myself, but Jen was right there and was super awesome through the support aspect of it. But she was still in the crisis of the re-identifying of it, and she says it well. She's like, everybody has a story, but it's not necessarily the story they want to have. You know what I mean? And the story that they get caught up in. She got saved when she was 11. It was a true life change. She was on mission from
yeah,
the beginning of inception. And so she was always faithful, always true, always pure, always. And I was not that, even though from an identity, you would look at us as equals, and she was far surpassed. And I was this masked agent for someone that wasn't a
yeah.
true follower of
I can
Christ.
understand and relate because by the time I met my wife, that was my wife. Like always faithful, always pure, like always true, always wanting to expose what needed to be exposed for the sake of freedom, for the sake of all that stuff. Ever since we've been married, like I would even say, like unfortunately, but I gotta own this. That she was the spiritual leader of our home.
Oh yeah,
Like she's the one that
praying over the
prayed over the
kid.
kids, prayed over me, prayed over every situation.
Yeah.
Obviously not perfect, but I would recall like even early in our marriage is that my wife would be the first one to respond. What is the Lord trying to say? Or maybe we
Oh
should
yeah.
pray about
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I know that's why when I exposed myself because I also didn't get caught. I exposed myself. Why I know she responded the way she shouldn't, which I didn't deserve her for her to respond in such a graceful way. Um, and I can relate to that and share to that. Where it's just it won't be the case for everybody, but
Yeah. It won't be.
yeah,
It won't be. But I was gifted with that, tremendously. And so then she kept asking me about my dad, and it
your
took
daughter or
my
your mom?
wife.
Okay,
Yeah. So it took 2 years for me to have an intersection where mom and dad came down for a visit. He was 80 years of age. Um, we were working on an outside project. I was talking about men's ministry, all these things that were happening, life
yeah,
change, and that, but he never knew the why or the how.
mm-hmm.
And so we were in the corner of my house repairing some wood that was rotted and outside, and I start the beginning portion of it, and I'm about ready to tell him how it all happened in the exposed moment, and he stops me, and he puts his finger in the air, and he goes, "Hey," he goes, "I really want to hear this, but I have to use the restroom." And I promise you on the Bible that I thought, all right, Lord, you don't want me to tell him. You're going to take him on the toilet seat. You're going to take him home so he doesn't have to hear this. It's like, you know, I mean, I really felt that. I'm like, okay, God's stopping me from, revealing this. I knew I wasn't supposed to tell him. And, but then he came back, and I had to go through the intersection of telling him how I got exposed to it.
Yeah.
and he was the one. And not that I wouldn't have been exposed to it in some other form or fashion, but that entry point was in his hands. And unfortunately, you're thinking this is going to be a great bonding moment, tear shed moment. Oh, I'm so glad that but it was he defended it. He talked about he got um, drawn to be on a council for pornography, and he was doing investigations, all this kind of stuff. But what he didn't know is for the next 10 years I followed him. But at that moment, the Spirit said, I really felt like unless the Spirit of God calls a man out,
Yeah.
there's no vein in me trying to call a man
Yeah,
out.
it's not your responsibility.
But
Yeah.
that was the closure of the circle where everybody knew um, that was in my life circle. The church knew, my family knew, um, my daughter-in-law knew, um, everyone knew where I was at except for my father, and it was sweet. The only sweet element of that portion of the story is that he dismissed. I was disappointed, of course. I walked up to the garage, and the overwhelming sense that came over me was the song "It Is Well with My Soul,"
Mm.
and that's truly what it felt like. It was like God saying, "I just asked you to be obedient, and you were obedient, and now there's peace there."
Yeah.
And that was the sweetest part of that, the entirety of that, even though it was difficult for him not to, you know, fall into his own repentance aspect with me. So we remained in that state for a very long time, my father and I. So,
Wow.
but um, but then it was like I was on mission all the time because that abundant life that Jesus spoke of, I was starting to experience, and I just had no idea that it was what it was supposed to be,
Yeah.
what it would feel like, and that. So it created a mission in me that's of Him. So
Yeah. I definitely gonna bring you back so we can talk about the birth of Make It Work because that's part of that. They're intertwined, right? But
yeah,
I genuinely feel led to ask you, what's it like being a priest of your home now?
um, I'll say it this way. Um, my dad would always tell stories. Well, I should say, he would tell maybe 5 or 6 stories of 50 years of ministry, and it was all about numbers or certain people or um, it was just the playbook of stories that you would go to tell
Mm-hmm.
over and over again, right? Um, I get to talk about a personal God all the time, and you know, every life scene is a reveal of Him,
Yeah.
and it's just really cool that it's that real.
Yeah.
So I have I don't even want to say spiritual conversations. I'll just say I just have real conversations with the kids all the time. And it's always about the Lord. It's like, it's hard to remember a conversation with our kids that we don't speak of God at some point in a sentence or in a frame or uh, what He's doing or how He's doing it or how can I trust Him or
Yeah.
how can I pray for this. It just emulates in every scene. It's crazy. And in my growing up, it was from 6 to 8, we're going to be in church, or from this time to this time, we're going to be doing this. But then you wouldn't, it wasn't really spoken of, elsewise. So it's crazy how it emulates everything. And it's hard to have conversations outside of spiritual conversations
Yeah.
because I almost don't know what to talk about. You know what I mean? Because everything's it leads back to in some avenue, some intersection, it leads back to him. And I just would never have thought that or dreamed that. You know, it's crazy.
Yeah. I agree. Hearing your story, I've obviously heard it before, but never really in this depth. How do you have you process, or how do you process the fact that you weren't able to? Let me reword it differently. Um, this is how I'm going to ask it instead. Has your kids brought any comments on them wishing they got this dad growing up, who is now on mission, who is the priest of the home, or
Well, we had a sweet covering. Back to my wife, we had a sweet covering in our household. I mean, we always had Christian music on. We always talked about giving. We always were serving in some form. So they were in the shadows of it all the time. They weren't in the rich conversations of it
mm,
that they probably were with Jen a lot more. She was phenomenal. Pour into mom every life scene. Pray with them every time before they got on the bus. We always prayed at family meals. I mean, we walked it out in an effective way that it was a safe haven. So they definitely were raised up in a faith household, but they had no awareness of the struggle that it was in. So what's sweet about it now is that they can readily talk about their struggles to me or their
mm,
vulnerability moments
beautiful.
with me. Um, and even the daughter-in-laws, there's some awkward conversations. Like I was sharing my testimony at Thanksgiving time with family members that would show up. You know what I mean? And they're like, "Why are you talking about this at
Yeah,
Thanksgiving time? We're supposed to be,
I'm here for the turkey.
But I was so in the facade of it for so long. I had to have a reset moment. You know what I mean? And whatever time that was to be. So I kind of apologize for those awkward conversations in the earlier years, but now it's you can't give up moments and times and life scenes anymore, because they're so diminishing, and the risk of the trajectory of not being in those,
Hmm.
you don't know where it would take you. So it's like, so just being in authentic conversations now, and they're still difficult at
Yeah,
times, but it's
being
always
authentic is difficult. Yeah,
it's always a safe place though. It's amazing how the spirit allows you to love when someone's authentic, and which the enemy would tell you the exact opposite. It was like if you ever become known, no one's gonna want to be with you. No one's gonna want to interact with you in that. And
yeah, you'll
so
be marked by
that
that sin.
yeah, and so it's like there's such and so if our story doesn't reveal the need of him, I don't know what you're talking about. You know what I mean? So that's why we say, every life story reveals the need for a savior.
Yeah,
So you just need to start talking about why do you need a savior? And where's the broken in your life? And it's crazy to think I was this close from the proximity of being under teaching and worship and serving and all that, and never truly experiencing it. That's why I say the mission field for me is the men in the church. It's like, because if you could walk into a church and know everybody's story genuinely,
yeah,
guess what you get to love? You get to love that person for who they are, where God's going to potentially use them to be. And I can only imagine the effectiveness of the gospel if we lived it out that way. It would be overwhelming,
yeah.
probably.
I kind of want to do a little teaser with our future video. Then we'll invite you back. Is not too long ago we got to maybe going on 2 months ago that we got to experience a Monday night of 28 individuals, men, in a room that you can point out and say, I know his story, I know his story, I know his story, I know his story, I know his story.
Yeah.
I know where the Lord's taking him. 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 And I know he's in his word every day. I know he's in his words every day. And it's, for me, it was an experience that I've never, ever thought could happen.
You would think of, if you were in a distress moment, you would call a family member in our distress moments, you would be calling a brother,
Yeah.
you know, and it's it's crazy how it gets framed out, but if it gets framed out correctly, it reveals the gospel in a way that's truly impactful.
Yeah, and that only happens when the Spirit calls you. You mentioned it, in your story earlier. Is just like when you were talking about your dad. Unless the Spirit tells them it's time, right? But through the Spirit, when He guides you through vulnerability, transparency, and accountability, that is what comes out.
Yeah.
Is this genuine, authentic desire to love the Lord with all your mind, with all your heart, with all your mind, and to love the neighbor.
Yeah, you read scripture in a different way when you start living it authentically. I mean, it's like it makes more sense when it says, "I love you, Lord." And David says, I love you," and I'm like, I always kind of wanted to say that, but nothing in my life, or should say nothing, but the real evidence of my life doesn't reveal a love for Him because there's not a fight for Him. And so I say I would love my wife, but if I'm not fighting for my wife, it doesn't express love. So to say now that I can say I love you, like I just was sharing this yesterday. I was like, I always imagined heaven growing up as like it's gonna be a big place. There's gonna be lots of people, and I'm gonna see Jesus from afar, and I'm just gonna be happy to be there. But now when I think of heaven, I think of seeing Him face to face, and I see of me putting something down to offer Him, like I did this for you. And I wish it was going to be a lot more than whatever it's going to be, but it's crazy how it's framed differently in my mind of it being more of an intimate interaction instead of just a presence interaction.
Yeah.
And it's sweet that He's gifted me with that vision of being face to face and hearing those words over my life. Well done, thou good and faithful servant. And I'm still feeling I'm not going to be worthy of that statement, but at least my life is in a genuine path that now recognizes like I really am doing it for Him. I'm not doing it for the Hinkle showed up, or or the Hinkles gave this, or it's not for that. It's literally there's not a greater joy that I've experienced than seeing another man experience Him. It's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I want to wrap up just by pointing out, and maybe you know this, maybe not, but I couldn't help to hear your story and think about all the different scenarios you try to fabricate on going to this university for that reason, moving to this for that reason, and that reason always being so you can love the Lord or get to know Him or no longer fall into the pornography issue. And now you've got all that, but what needed to happen first was the genuine revealing and life change of your heart, because now you do have what you had above Jones, where the structure, where you're in your word every day, you're meeting with brothers, you have accountability. We're not in this fight like alone. You now have the echo chamber of godliness, where you're surrounded by other brothers who are on mission, on war. Like you were able to get everything you were seeking for.
Yeah.
But He now gave it to you when you truly surrendered and were fully known.
Yeah.
Because now these things will work for you. Now these things will keep you, so that I can call you good and faithful servant.
Yeah. It's those paths were parallel, but they never intersected until I became known. Yeah. And so it's I'm very thankful that intersection took place, and I told Jen, it's like I give you a lot of credit for having me reveal myself to someone else, because if it wouldn't have been, I would have never been in the ministry that I'm in now.
Yeah.
So sweet.
Yeah. Well, thank you, brother, and thank you for
coming
by, and thank you for listening and for hang on there. I know this word was for you.